right. What's up, Casey? How are we doing today, man?
Doing good, Quentin. How you doing?
The obligatory hello. It's good to see you, man. It's good to see you.
Same.
Bro, obviously people are here to hear about you, maybe a little bit about me, our
hmm
time together. I want to ask you the first question.
hmm
What for people who don't know, you and I, Casey, we were roommates in Beijing. So we lived in China together for a year. After that, you had went on a bicycle journey around the country, the US, I should say. Um, and then that kind of brings us to December of 2019, November, December. You and I, we reconvene in Florida. And shortly after that, we were in Colombia for a couple months. But that's the context. Now I kind of want to, dude, let's just get into it. Before China, for people who don't know, Casey, what were you doing before China? Why did you ultimately decide to go to China?
Okay. Well, before China, I had just graduated from college. I got a BA in philosophy, prestigious California State University at Long Beach.
Mm-hmm.
And I really had no idea what I wanted to do. So I was looking for a job, and the China thing just popped up. And I thought, why not? My main part of the reason I wanted to go to China was because my main goal in life, I suppose, is to write a philosophy book. And I thought that that would be a new experience that would give me something special to say. And so I just signed up right then and there and went.
Absolutely. And before you go, what are your feelings, man? I know for me, I was super nervous. I couldn't sleep for the last couple of days. I was
Mm.
stateside. How was it for you? Were you just like, hey, man, I'm ready to get out of LA. I'm ready to get into Beijing and start my life anew. What were those emotions like?
Well, at first, the way that things usually happen is I don't think about them at all. And well, actually, when I first signed up, I was super excited. Like I tried to learn how to write Chinese calligraphy, and I was like, this is all going to happen this way. And I was constantly thinking about it. And then for the next 20 days, I totally forgot about it. Maybe 2 days before I was going to go, I'm like, no shit, I'm going to China. Like this is a huge, huge thing. And then I started freaking out. But once I got into the plane, I think it relaxed me a bit. I need to ask you about this, but looking back, the first 2 weeks at China, it feels like it's a slice of my life that is like a unique feeling of just kind of not knowing what's going to happen. That I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, I had like a very unique, like, I don't know, like nervousness, but like hope for what was going to happen. How did you feel about that?
The first couple weeks.
Yeah, especially like in the hotel.
So my entry into China was a little different than yours, and what I mean by that is leading up to China. Like I had just got done with a bike trip of my own across the United States. Like me and my buddy, after school was out, we were just like, "Hey man, let's go biking," and that was scary and hectic in its own way because you're constantly meeting new people, you're constantly in these different environments. But then, so for China, the only thing I was concerned about, in all honesty, was the language barrier. Like once we kind of got there, and it was like, "All right, man, like." This is a safe place. No one's, toting guns. No one's like trying to rob me. Once you get that initial comfort, for me, it was then at that point, I just started to like thrive emotionally. Like I met yourself, I met B, and it was like, wow, here's like a real crew who I can like get along with. Because
Mhm.
before that, I was thinking, I'm going to be a lone ranger over here, right? Like, I'm not going to know anyone. I obviously don't speak Chinese. This is going to be an adventure. But it really quickly transitioned into like, all right, again, I got Casey, I got B. We are going to we're just going to run this city. And that doesn't mean we're going to own the city and we're going to be the wealthiest people here, anything like that. It just means like, we're going to do our thing and we're going to enjoy the hell out of it. And very quickly, I felt comfortable in Beijing.
That's interesting. I didn't think about how you and Amanda affected me because I'm not super emotionally aware, but I'm sure that I would have had a much harder time if I didn't have you guys. Um, Especially because once we decided we were going to live together, like pretty much everything just fell into place. And it just became a kind of a rhythm. So yeah, that was a big moment, definitely.
Literally, dude. Because it's like, and again, for people who didn't read the story when I interviewed you a couple of years ago on my blog, I meet you the first day, I shake your hand and you're like, hey, I'm Casey. I'm like, oh, hey, I'm Quentin. And you're like, yeah, I'm from LA. And I'm like, Jesus, this guy's giving me the big flex. Like, this guy's a real, like, 'cause, dude, you got the movie star looks, you have a charisma about you. And then it was like 20 minutes later when we all go in the bus, to go register whatever we did. You're talking to this woman in our group, and I'm like, all right, I'm never going to talk to that guy again. But then, we reconvened later that day, and you're like, dude, you want to live together? Because it became very clear, like, dude, we're just gonna have to figure this out like ASAP Rocky. Like, there's not gonna be any sort of, hey, like, we'll give you a couple months to find a place to live while you stay in the hotel. It's like, no, man, you got 2 weeks. You should probably find 2 or 3 roommates because it's expensive to have your own apartment. And just like that, it's like, all right, I'm with Casey. Like, this dude's my ride or die for better or worse. And fortunately, our relationship flourished and evolved from there. But yeah, man, it was it was crazy.
Definitely. Well, I love the story. You always go back to it, where we're in the bus and I'm talking to a girl, and you think I'm never going to talk to that guy again, because, and also the California thing, because I'm like the last person you would think is from California. The fact that I floss, like, I sit at home all day and I read books, and I'm not like super sociable. So I think I compare your thoughts about me to that other woman we met at the bar. And when she didn't like me, and she's like, "You're not like Californians," and I was like, "Yeah, you're right. I'm not."
Tell that story, because obviously people don't know what we're talking about. But like, because I know what you're talking about. We're at Jing A, right? We're having a burger, classic Sunday night or whatever it was. Tell that story from your perspective.
Okay, well, me and you were having a beer or two at Jing A, and there was a attractive woman in front of us that you went up and wanted to talk to, and she was kind of stuck up. She was like, so you were like, "Hey, do you want to hang out?" She's like, "No," or what did she say?
I don't remember verbatim, dude. Like, obviously she rejected me, so.
She said no, but then she comes back and wants to hang out. And I thought that we were having a nice conversation. But then I asked her, "What do you think about like Chinese culture? How is it different from American culture?" And she was a Chinese woman, and she's like, "I don't think that we can, like, we're not ready to talk about that yet." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I want to talk about that." And she's like, "Well, then I don't have to be here." And I was like, "Okay." She just
man,
looked at us dumbfounded, like this isn't supposed to happen. And I do remember I looked at her and did the like turn around motion. Not really nice in hindsight, but my like douchebag ego liked that.
Well, dude, it's this. So that moment, I don't ever think about it because I didn't have, like, for me, it was a total failure, right? Like, I go up to this woman, and I'm bad at approaching women. And what I mean by that is I don't have any, like, there's no art to it. I just literally like, "Hey, do you want to hang out with us?"
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, "No." And then for whatever reason, like you said, she turns around and she asks, like, "Where are you from?" And I tell her, like, "Oh, I'm from Minnesota." And she just was instantly like, I could not give two shits less. Like, Minnesota, like, you might as well be from, the middle of nowhere. And then you're like, "Well, I'm from LA." And she's like, "Oh, LA. Yeah, no, I love LA." And I like kind of withdrew from the conversation because I'm like, geez, like, I can't compete with that, right? Like, this woman has this fantasy in her mind of LA, and like, dude, everyone from there must be just bawling. And I'm sitting back here like, yeah, man, I'm from like a suburb of Minneapolis. Like, nothing cool to see here. Let's move along. But yeah, man, I thought it was awesome because, like you said, when she started to have like a bit of an attitude, and you're just like, all right, turn around. Like, we don't want to talk to you. And it was a interesting moment where it was an insight into your personality, right? Because you're a guy who's very blunt, much like myself, but you're blunt to like the 10x degree. Like, if I think I'm blunt, you're just like, we could get into the stories about your bluntness, but it was fun to watch.
Please.
What's that?
Different adjective, please. We can say honest.
Yeah, I'm being generous. But let me kind of ask a different question about China then, Casey. Everyone knows you and I were teaching English there. We're kind of doing our thing. That is what it is. We don't necessarily need to make a comment on that because it's a job. But beyond that, how did you see China? Like, let's say outside of the office, like what was it to you?
Um, well, when I see it, I think of it more in terms of like comparing it to America or where I grew up. Um, and I feel like China was a much more normal place than than a normal American would think. When we were in America, I would always hear propaganda about how China's communist and just bad, right? There's all these bad connotations floating around with China. But then we get there and it's streets are really clean. They've got great public transportation. It's very safe. People are really nice. They can be kind of rude sometimes, but but overall, it was just a very, very nice country and place to live. And I never felt like oppressed or like the CCP is going to come and steal me or something like that. So I came away thinking it's a nice place, and a lot of what our country thinks about China is just kind of propaganda to a certain extent. Yeah, that was what I came away with. What about you?
I mean, I would agree. Great place to live. You know, I mean, for $500 a month, we have a 3-bedroom apartment in downtown Dongjimen, you know, like the center of the city. So that's cool.
Mhm.
I enjoy that. I agree, man. China, like when people, dude, the propaganda in America regarding China is ridiculous because people are like, oh, China, you know, it's communist. The people there, like, they live horrible lives. And again, we were in the capital city, Beijing. So that's going to look a little different than if you were in rural China. But dude, Beijing is just like any other international city. You know, it's very vibrant. There's a lot of money, a lot of wealth, but it's extremely safe. I mean, in my opinion, out of all the places you and I have been, like, because we've been to China, obviously, South Korea, Japan, Colombia. By far, the most dangerous place I think in the world is America. Like, just the threats that are constantly there. It's America. You know, China. There's no like there isn't. There's no dude. Again, no one has guns. No one is like, and I think a lot of that is because, and I'm not trying to get too political, but the punishments for the crimes, they're so severe. You know, so here it's like, oh, dude, I got caught smoking a little weed. It's like, hey, man, either go like put that out, or we're gonna give you a ticket. There, I think you go to jail for like 2 years or something.
No shit.
And I don't know, like, don't quote me on the 2 years, but you know what I mean. Like, their punishments are just so much more severe, and it keeps people more in order.
Definitely. No, I'm sure that would have an effect. If I knew I was going to jail for 2 years for smoking weed, I'd rethink it. Yeah, and I would say like America really does feel more dangerous to me than any other place. Maybe Colombia, maybe Bogota was a little bit more dangerous feeling, but America is just like living in Long Beach right now, and the homeless problem is out of control. Like I cannot walk a block without, especially if I'm smoking. Well, I can't walk a block without being harassed by a homeless person asking for a cigarette. And then when you say like yes, or if you say no, which I always do, they don't respond like, oh, okay, no big deal. A lot of them are like kind of aggressive. So yeah, like American cities to me feel a little bit just tense. Yeah, and that was eye-opening comparing that to China.
Absolutely, man. I mean, I'm not by any means an LA expert, but in the few days I was there with you, it was, I mean, dude, I had a great time going down to Venice Beach, you know, and checking that out. And, you know, I can't remember where we drove to, but we drove out of LA. We went to like a place 2 hours south. Name isn't really important, but either way, it was cool to see like some of the parts of California that otherwise I wouldn't see, you know. But yeah, man, to me, it's like, it's just crazy how like when we got out of the bars, let's say that night in Venice Beach, all of a sudden, like, dude, the beach is just overrun with people, and you're like, man, I don't feel so safe. And again, not trying to like put judgment on anyone, but at the end of the day, like we're all kind of animals, and people in desperate situations tend to do maniacal things. And it was like, yeah, dude, like I don't want to be here. You talk about, you know, you've transitioned to Long Beach, and still similar situation. It is interesting because, you know, obviously Rogan has talked about it, and it's like, what do we do? You know, how do you eradicate homelessness? I don't have any idea. I don't even know where to begin. But to say it's not a problem or that we shouldn't do anything about it, I think would be a little bit irresponsible. I mean, in your opinion, Casey, what is there anything that could be done to avoid you walking outside of your house and being harassed, let's say, by a guy who, when you say no, man, no cigarettes, he's like, well, dude. You know, like how can we help that guy out? Do we just give him a job? Do we give him a place to live? Like, what do we do?
Well, help him out. that gets more complicated. I mean, if you want to look at it like politically incorrectly, then I think China like just kicks homeless people out and says you can't come to our major cities. So there's definitely a spectrum of like, are we trying to help these people? Are we trying to punish them so much that being homeless is just impossible? Or not impossible, but we won't be bothered, let's say. I don't know about helping them though, because it's weird because some homeless people you'll meet, in my experience, I've actually talked to a lot of homeless people when I was like biking across the country, and some of them are mentally stable and like normal people that just seem to kind of like being homeless. They hate the system. And some of them are very clearly, there's something wrong with them. Not just like they're kind of depressed, like, no, they like talking to voices in their head. People like that, I don't really think there is a clear solution. And even the people who are homeless and like are normal mentally, like they're healthy, they're so against the system that I don't think they want to integrate. So I don't know how we could like help bring them in really. Maybe disincentivize, like I said, homelessness by making it like you can't go to a city. So that, but it is a hard question. But like you said, it's a super important question because I've talked to other friends and everyone mentions that the homelessness thing, especially in California, is just it's out of control and it really takes away from our quality of life. Like I don't feel like I'm not against homeless people. I pity them and I feel for their like whatever they're going through. But I'm a selfish person. I don't want to deal with walking down the street and having to worry about a homeless person. So it's a real problem, and I think we need to do more to address it. What about you? What do you think?
I mean, it's so complex, and I think if there was an easy answer, the powers that be would have tried to help. I think, and this isn't just with homelessness, but with a lot of different things. Like if you're relying on the government to make your life better, you're probably going to be waiting a long time. You know, like an ideal system to me is a bit of give and take, right? Like I'm going to work really hard to get myself out of whatever dire straits I'm in. And then, you know, hopefully there's a system in place. For example, there's available jobs for me that can help me build a bit of a system, give me a bit of a purpose. And then that's a way for me to eventually elevate. But you know, and this isn't just, again, this applies to so many different aspects of life. People kind of want the easy answer, right? They kind of want well, how can we get you off the street right now and into a apartment, you know, where you have that's fully furnished and then you're able to get a job? It's really not that simple because the person themselves has to want to be out of that situation. Like you talk about, some people, they just want to be homeless for whatever reason. You know, that in theory, like you can't eliminate homelessness if someone wants to be homeless, right? The people who are, you know, let's say on drugs and they're, you know, going through addiction cycles, like you said, I pity them. But it's not as easy as just like, hey, let's all throw them in an apartment complex. Like there's just, it has to be give and take. And that balance is everyone's going to interpret that a little differently. But yeah, if I want to get out of a situation, I have to help myself, and then hopefully there's opportunities for me within that to help lift me up even more. So again, not an easy topic to broach. I think that's why, again, you see that rampant homelessness because who knows what to do.
Totally. When I think the reason there's no easy answers right now is we're in a transition period in world history. I don't know what the next transition is, and I don't think anyone really does, but it's becoming clear to everyone that the system we're in can't stand. Like this is, like if you look at the graph of how good society's been for the last 20 years, it's been like dipping down consistently. Starting from, I remember like 9/11, since then, everything's been kind of going wonky and getting worse and worse. So I think the problem is it's like the entire system of governance, economics, that we live in is just, in a sense, it's corrupt and it can't continue the way it does. So there isn't an easy answer. I think that we're going to eventually have to just kind of break things apart and see what happens.
Is that a result of capitalism in your opinion?
Well, I mean, to an extent, because capitalism is a very powerful force in the world for the last 100 years. So it must be a part of that. And if there's a million definitions for capitalism, but if it's generally just like I can pay you for a service and you can buy a service from me and that's it, and there's no rules really, yeah, capitalism is an incredibly toxic force. like we've talked about thoughts. But like
Thought.
or let's just say like sexual relations are not in the best place right now. Men and women don't get along. Men and women have a hard time like finding a good life with each other right now. And a lot of that is a product of capitalism and the effects of capitalism. This is part of it, but like, you know, OnlyFans, right? OnlyFans.com.
Unfortunately.
I mean, if I was an 18-year-old girl who couldn't find a job and I could go on OnlyFans and make a few $1,000s a month taking my clothes off, right? I might do that. As it is, I'm a man, and so nobody's going to pay me anything. But that's a real issue, and that is a product of having capitalism, where you can sell things with no limits that are like moral limitations, right? Yeah, so capitalism is a huge, huge issue.
I think capitalism has its flaws.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think there's a better system, right? I mean, for example, so you made a couple interesting points. I'll kind of address like the ability for a woman, let's say, to go on OnlyFans and monetize and profit off of her image and likeness and, you know, that sort of thing. You know, like, dude, you saw that in Colombia, right? Where it's like those women, they're not like, dude, those women are not in, and for people who don't know what I'm talking about, like in Colombia, there's a lot of prostitution, right? Like those women, it's not as simple as like, oh, like they're immoral, they're bad people. Like there's not a lot of opportunities. And the more I talk to people, it was like a lot of those women, they actually immigrated from Venezuela. So there are a lot of, like, again, in Venezuela has its, I mean, just a terrible set of problems, unfortunate circumstances. I think it's just a bit naive to assume, well, if a woman is on OnlyFans, or if she is, you know, roaming the streets of Bogota, she's immoral. She has made countless bad decisions in her life. I don't think it's ever that simple, right? And that doesn't mean, oh, you know, we can't help her, that she can't help herself. But I mean, if in a situation, like if there's no jobs available, what do you tell that person to do? I mean, and I'm not advocating for prostitution, for example. I don't think it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I just think, like, what would you legitimately do if you're like, yeah, I can't just go work at McDonald's, right? Or I can't live with my parents or whatever. The world becomes kind of a nasty, ugly place. And I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, because all of a sudden we're talking about, you know, the worst parts of human nature, which everyone kind of knows that that's not exactly pretty. But it's, yeah, man, it's just so complex. It's so complex. It's like, but another point, and I'll kind of veer away from this because, again, it's very sensitive, and I'm not going to speak for anyone because I've been fortunate to have good things happen to me in life. But when you talk about capitalism, I mean, think of the rise of China, dude. That didn't come as a byproduct of anything other than capitalism, right? Like they're trying to make as much money as possible, and it's very dog eat dog over there. Dude, I don't see a better system than capitalism. I think the unfortunate thing is that within capitalism, there will be people who are not willing to play capitalism, and therefore they're going to be behind because the system isn't going to benefit them. Like, for example, if you're unwilling to work, if you're unwilling to, you know, put in effort to try to attain more resources, yeah, capitalism is not going to do you any favors, because capitalism favors, you know, the bold, the people who are successful, the job creators, that sort of thing. It's so complicated.
So, I mean, first, it's super complicated, but I don't want to say that I'm morally judging, let's say, women on OnlyFans or who have to be prostitutes. I do, like I said, if I was a woman who was 18 and couldn't find a job, I would be on OnlyFans. But I just think that doesn't, just because I understand why an individual would do that, I don't think society should make it possible for individuals to like fall to their human nature, let's say. So I don't mean to judge them in that sense. It's just to say, betterment of everything, for the betterment of society, it might be better not to let that happen. But we can veer away and go back to capitalism. Like, yes, like we talk about the rise of China and how that's a consequence of capitalism, and that's very true to an extent. But we have to understand capitalism there's government regulation in countries and there's free market enterprise, right? So if we define capitalism as just free market enterprise, like libertarians, like that sort of thing, capitalism is everything the government's not doing. But things like you can't murder people, right? The law, you can't steal, you can't like sell drugs, you can't sell drugs to kids, you can't do like these kinds of things. That's not capitalism. That's not economic exchange. That's values that make it so economic exchange doesn't go crazy. Because if you had a system with zero values, then you could do things like sell children, right, or have slaves. So no country is just capitalistic. That's kind of the false sort of dichotomy, capitalism, socialism, that people are locked in. But you have to realize that it's not that simple, right? And second, with China, they have a lot of government control. Not a ton. They have a lot of they've become more capitalist, but they still do have, and I'm not very familiar with their government, but they still have top-down control from the government dictating what businesses are acceptable, what businesses are not acceptable, and things like that. So I think we need to look at it as a more complex interplay between capitalism and socialism, or really economic forces and moral forces that control economics and make it so economics doesn't force us to do things like sell children or, institute slavery or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on a guy like Jeff Bezos? Super billionaire, a guy who, from my perspective, he's a guy who obviously has a massive amount of wealth, but he wasn't born with that wealth, right? He earned it. He had to put in a lot of hours. He had to take risks. He had to be bold. And I know a lot of people bang on him and they're like, oh, this guy, he's the root of all evil. But the amount of jobs he creates, it's like, you kind of and it's not just like, hey, everyone come work in a factory. There's a lot of people who work for Amazon who make a lot of money, and everyone benefits as a result of his ingenuity and his innovation. Because some people will say things like, billionaires are immoral or no one should have that amount of money. Mm-hmm. But again, if Bezos is providing a quality of life for people as a result of the company he's created, I don't see that as immoral. What are your thoughts on a guy like Jeff Bezos?
Well, I worked for Bezos once upon a time. Moving boxes for him. So thank you, Jeff Bezos, for that. But no, I think it all comes down to, at the end of the day, something like social stability. So if Bezos having all that money is making the country better and more stable collectively, then I say, great, good for you, Jeff Bezos. But if people who are income inequality begins stretching so much that you've got someone like Jeff Bezos with, I think, 150, almost $200 billion, and then people who can't eat, who make nothing right now, that eventually, if that continues, that country will essentially destroy itself. We see this with the storming of the Capitol, right? Or the storming. It wasn't really a storming. It's a kind of a shit show. But what happened at and all the things that are happening in the country, all the negative things, all the polarization, everything. This is a consequence of economic instability to a large degree. So I don't blame Jeff Bezos as an individual. Good for you, Jeff Bezos. You kicked ass, right? You win. But Jeff Bezos wants to live in a society where people don't bang down his door and slit his throat. And if society continues to get worse and worse and worse, people will specifically try and kill Jeff Bezos, right? It'll be like a French Revolution thing. People are already putting things like joking. They put a guillotine in front of Jeff Bezos' house or in front of rich people's houses as a pointing to the French Revolution. We can kill all of you guys. So that's more my point of view. Is not about the individual, but about what is allowing our system to be stable and allow everybody to live a good life. And I want to do that, whatever that is.
This is going to be this philosophical waxing that we're engaging in is much more your area of expertise than mine. So I want to kind of bring it to a more understandable level for, some people who, we can talk philosophically all day, but when we talk about a disparity in wealth, and there obviously is a gap, but I think there's a couple flaws with that, right? As a society, we will say things like, oh, billionaires or people with all this money, they're bad. At the same time, we also preach, well, money isn't everything, right? There's more to life than money, yada, yada, yada. So if there was an equilibrium to be struck, Casey, where is that number at? What's a number where someone, if they were at $50,000 a year salary, $60,000 a year salary, what's the threshold where it's okay, I can have a good quality of life? Mm-hmm. And then also, are we willing to work to get to that point? Because I don't think it's as simple as, well, Jeff Bezos, he shouldn't pay people only $15 an hour because he has, X amount of money. He should be willing to give up more of his money. That's sort of an altruistic like point of view where it just assumes that the person who has all the resources, again, didn't work hard to get those resources or was just given them. What are your thoughts? Like, as far as if we're talking on a pragmatic, like this is easy to relate to, what's the balance to be struck between money and quality of life?
Well, you're kind of hobbling me right now because I know how to be easy to understand, but I would say it's not a number. Like, this is honestly, I won't be too complicated, but this is part of the problem, is that people don't want to think complexly. They just want an easy answer. Like, oh, $50,000 a year, that would solve everything. No, it's not a number. It's can you live life and essentially be happy and safe and stable? I don't know what that number is, but essentially, what do you want in life, Quentin? I guess that's to make it relatable. What do you want in life?
Well, so like anyone that I currently have, I think that's a symptom of just being in a capitalist society, but also being a human, right? Like, I like to consider myself a motivated person, someone who's trying to be better today than I was yesterday.
Yeah.
And part of that is like, well, I want to make more money, right? Obviously, one day I would like to have a wife and kids. To do so, I need to have enough resources to ensure that I could, properly raise a family. If I'm only making $20,000 a year, like, sure, I can be charming and sophisticated and all that, but like that's not really going to pay the bills, Like, there's got to be some actual bread behind the words that I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. I don't think there's a number. I've heard a lot of people say, well, if you made $75,000 a year, anything past that is just excess. Mm-hmm. Then you have too much money and you have more than you need to be happy. I don't know. Like, again, I'm not an economics expert by any stretch, but for example, when I see things like, well, we should raise the minimum wage to $15. Like, again, I'm not a mathematical savant, but like, if you were to force people to pay someone a certain wage, right? Well, that sort of implies that the business owner isn't going to try to recoup those lost wages, right? So, for example, if you were to pay me $15 an hour, I would, then you would raise your prices to account for that. And then yes, the $15 that used to have this amount of value, like it just has less value, right? And I'm not doing a great job of explaining it, but no, my point is if $15 an hour, like what it's worth now, it wouldn't be worth $15 an hour at a certain point, because if you're forcing people to pay that without getting anything in return, that's not going to work. I don't think there's a number, Casey. I think if a man and a woman were married and they each made in combination $100,000, and this applies to probably everywhere except downtown LA or New York City, you'd have a pretty good quality of life, right? Maybe you can go on a vacation once a year. You could probably both have a car. You can live in an apartment, or God forbid, own a house. America, though, like when we talk about the American dream, I think a lot of times people think, well, that automatically means I have a house, I drive a really nice car, I have 2 kids, they're going to go to a state school. Like, our definition of happiness, it's I don't know, it's much different than other countries. I will say that. Totally.
So I think that you're right about the whole, like, raising minimum wage is a Band-Aid. It's not fixing the real problem. And I think this is the real issue that I want to get to, is a lot of what we're trying to do is fix the symptoms and not the disease, right? Like, we're popping Tylenol every day rather than figuring out what's causing us to have whatever issue we have. Because the real issue, when you say, like, I don't want to pay a guy $15 an hour if he doesn't, like, offer anything, like if he doesn't have a good work ethic or whatever, well, we have to say, well, why do people not have good work ethics? Why do people not have skills? Why do people not have these sorts of values and abilities? And that's a systemic issue that goes all the way to the public schools, and the fact that we have a terrible public school system. It goes to the fact that, like, families are broken up and that we don't have a good family system that binds people together and teaches people values, right? We don't have a religious system. Not that you have to believe in God, but like a system of talking about the values that our country has and holds and how it's good to be a hardworking person, right? There's just tons of problems with the way we live our life on a day by day basis. And in our capitalist mindset, we're like throwing the money at every problem, thinking giving more money will fix it. It won't. It never will. Because the fundamental part of human life is what we believe and how we act on this just day-to-day thing, right? On our day-to-day lives. So until we start tackling the real, like the root of the problem, we're not going to fix anything. That's why I don't want to put a number on it.
Absolutely. I think you're more than correct. I think when you start to tap into that root though, and this is where a lot of times I think politics fails, is because the root of the issues are typically associated with money, right? So if you were to say things like, well, kids, maybe they don't work as hard in school because they watch too much YouTube or they play too many video games. Well, all of a sudden, if you're like, hey, we should limit YouTube, well, the execs over at YouTube, Casey, aren't going to be like, yeah, I'm okay with that. Like, no, that cuts into their ad revenue, that cuts into everything.
Yeah.
There are negatives to capitalism, undoubtedly, unquestionably. I don't know if there is, like, here's a question for you. Where would you live in America? Where would you live if you couldn't live in America? Where's a country where you're like, there's a lot of opportunity. There's a chance where, hey, if I'm willing to grind and work my way up, I'm going to get somewhere. Is there a country that like pops out to you as like, I'm going there?
I'd go back to China.
You go back to China?
China's growing super fast. It's safe. Yeah, it's a great country. In my experience.
Do you think people in China would say the same thing? Like, is this a bit of the grass is always greener, right? So for example, I grow up in China. I kind of look at the US and I'm like, hey, I might want to go there. Like, seems like there's some decent opportunities. Mm-hmm. Also, I mean, but realistically though, dude, could you go to China? And I'm not talking about, get the visa, anything like that. But unless you were going to be an English teacher, like literally what would you do there? Because you don't speak Chinese or Mandarin, so you could probably work at an international company. Mm-hmm. But if that's not an opportunity, if that's not available, like, dude, what literally would you do?
Well, I'd learn Chinese. We're talking about like an imaginary scenario. Mm-hmm. I would learn Chinese, and then just integrate into their world,
their culture.
Yeah, and which is how I think all immigrants should act if they go to a country, learn the language and integrate into the culture. Yeah,
absolutely. No, I completely agree. I think it's a very good point actually, because as soon as I asked that question, I kind of realized like, yeah, you would probably make an attempt to learn the local language to some extent, right?
Another year of ni hao.
Chinese is hard though, man. Like dude, after a year, and I didn't do any formal studying or anything like that. I only really knew the numbers because obviously you have to barter for everything. But then, like the basic hello, how's it going? That sort of thing. I told you about my buddy who I met in Florida, like speaks fantastic Chinese. Mm-hmm. He's a guy who, he had spent a lot of time in China. We're talking 6 years. Had become very, very good with the language. And him and I had conversations about like, hey man, is that the end game for you? And he had kind of still made mention like, nah man, like America's where I want to be. And of course, family lives here, all those types of things. What I'm driving at is I think America, for all its flaws, right? Like we can talk about healthcare, we can talk about homelessness, all those things. I think America is a place where if you put a lot of effort into it, it will pay dividends, right? Like if you're willing to grind, if you're willing to work 60 hours, like for example, dude, I have a 9-to-5 job, but like that's not the only way I make money. Like I still have a couple other streams of income because A, you just never know like what can happen. You always have to have a backup plan. But B, it's like, dude, I'm chasing a dream, man. Like I got my second book coming out. Like I want to be somebody, like I work for a fantastic guy and he works hard. And like, I was telling you about this, but it's just, I see what is necessary to become that level of successful. Mm-hmm. And I want to emulate it. I want to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. I want to have my own dreams fulfilled. Well, to do that, I have to work really hard to do that, mm-hmm. But I feel like in 10 years, if I continue along this path of like trying to get better as a writer, as like a content creator, as an individual, right? There's going to be something waiting for me there. And as we see around the world, that's not necessarily the case. In some places, it's not as simple as like, hey man, grind and grind and grind, and then good things will happen. Like in some places, opportunities are practically zero, if not zero.
Mm-hmm. In other countries?
Yeah, and that's why I'm making a claim as like, I know, because you had talked about America, there's a huge divide. I think there's a huge wealth divide, absolutely. But again, that just because let's say you're in the lower percentile of earners, it doesn't mean you always have to stay there. It doesn't mean you can't do things to get out of there.
No, I don't. I agree. I think like I agree with what you're saying. I think that it's good that, well, in America we love winners. That's how America works. Is we like winners, and if we like people who will work those 60 hours or 80 hours a week and succeed, and that's great. But a lot of people in life just want to, you know, they don't have the like childhood trauma that gives them this sense of inadequacy that we have, right? That forces us to have this huge dream. Like, I'm going to write a philosophy book and change the world. What kind of a realistic dream is that, right? Or like even you saying like, I want to be really rich. I don't think a lot of people really think that, or like they don't have that internal drive, because that drive comes from it. Well, it doesn't matter. I don't need to psychoanalyze it, but most people are normal, and most people are just want to live a nice, comfortable life. And I think those people in society are really, that's what society's for. It's not for great people to do great things and like have private jets. It's so all people can live a good, comfortable life with their community, with their family, and help next generation have good values together, right? It's just for human happiness. And a society, which I think America is more and more becoming, that makes it so you either grind your ass away in the system, grind it to dust so that you can one day stand on top of it with a private jet, or you're nothing, right? That cannot stand. Because then like going back to the social stability, if you can't have that many winners. So if there's a few winners and a ton of losers, those losers are eventually going to say like, I don't want to play this game anymore, and flip the chessboard. So, I mean, on both hands, I just think the normal person, or like the average person, they matter more than the successful person, I think. And that's the values I would like to put into our country.
For sure. But here's the thing though, right? And I agree. Like, there's nothing wrong with like just wanting to have a simple life. Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The problem is though, like, this is why like I really like a guy like Jeff Bezos. You know, I don't obviously know him, but I like what he's about in the sense of creating a better opportunities for everyone else, right? Like, if you're a programmer at Amazon, for example, you know, you're probably making $150,000 a year. That's a pretty good life, you know. I don't think like you need those types of innovators, because ultimately they raise the quality of life for everybody else, right? For example, if Jeff Bezos had $200 billion, but he was only willing to pay you, Casey, his programmer, $10 an hour, you wouldn't work for him. You'd be like, no, man, like, this is messed up. I'm not going to do it, right? And because of capitalism, someone else would invent a better product and they would pay you $30 an hour, and you would go work for them. And ultimately, because you're a talented programmer, Casey, like, Amazon would falter because they're not paying each other enough, like their employees enough. This company over here, let's just call them Best Buy or whatever, they would ultimately rise up because it's like, hey man, like, we have the most talent, we're the most successful because we're willing to pay them. So like, again, this gets a little bit back into like I'm willing to work hard and I'm chasing a dream and I'm ambitious. But that also affects the people who, like you said, they just want to have kind of that normal, I'll work a 9 to 5, but ultimately my happiness lies in my family, not necessarily like in my purpose, right? Like, I'm not trying to do anything revolutionary. I'm just trying to exist. I think everyone benefits when you have a guy like Jeff Bezos who raises the standard of living just simply by the amount of money he can pay you.
Well, I totally agree. I have nothing against the Bezoses of the world. I think that they're incredibly important. I just don't think someone like the outliers in society, like the people who are going to do something great, whether it's through a business, through art, philosophy, whatever, they don't need your help, because they are individuals who have a burning desire inside of themselves. So society doesn't need to structure itself to help these like lightning strikes, right? Like these people who are, you can't capture lightning, like these people are lightning strikes. Society can't really help them because it doesn't know how they operate, right? Like, I think genius is something that happens like spontaneously. We can't plan out genius. Like, we couldn't make a school to like churn out geniuses, right? Genius is something that just happens. Regardless, I think we need, so with just, like, we can have the Bezoses and let them do their thing. But I think we need to have a focus on letting normal people have an easy pathway to a good and productive life. As far as the whole like capitalism, if they pay you badly, you're going to go to another company, and if they pay you badly, you go to another. That's true. Like, that's the theoretical truth of capitalism, but in practice, we're not, like, capitalism is not making us richer and richer and richer and more stable. If you look at like the last 50 years, it's been making us kind of poorer and less stable. So I don't think that story really fits anymore. It's more of a story than the truth. It's kind of almost a mythology that Americans believe, because that makes us trust capitalism and not question it. But right now, that story and that mythology is starting to crumble, because people see, like, I'm looking out my window and see a homeless guy walking down the street. Like, this reality in front of me does not match the story that you just told. And I want to ask why is that, right?
It's a fair question. I'm not well versed enough, Casey. I don't have any empirical evidence to refute what you're saying.
And I value your perspective. This is just, what I think about it. Yeah.
For sure. Maybe it's me living in a fantasy, right? It's me living in a universe where, because I wake up every day telling myself, like, hey man, if I'm willing to put in the work, I'm going to get somewhere in 5-10 years. Like, there's going to be sort of that, what's the term? Whatever the Lucky Charms guy has at the end of the tunnel.
Oh, yeah.
The honey pot, the gold pot, the pot of riches.
Gold.
You had said something earlier, something to the effect of, like, I want to be rich. I'm not averse to being rich, but it's not something I'm actively like, hey man, I need to be rich or else. Like, rich to me is not necessarily a financial number. It's just as much a state of mind, right? And like, because I mean, today, dude, I felt rich because I woke up, went and played basketball, like, got a sweat going, interacted with my friends. I was like, man, like, this is awesome. Like, I could not be happier right now. Whether I had $1,000 in my bank account or $1 million, like, dude, no one can rob me of the satisfaction of hanging out with my friends and, playing basketball, something I love to do. Mm-hmm. So I think it's more like, I would just like to state, I love the process of becoming better. I love the process of, like, dude, for people who don't know, you didn't like my first book, right? And that's totally okay. But my second book, it's like, you liked that one more. And I don't write books to win you over, Casey, but you're someone I respect the hell out of, and I think you're super smart. And so, dude, of course it's meaningful when you're like, hey man, like, I see the progress. And it's like, that's a win for me. You don't need to pay me $3,000 to feel good about that. Like, I just feel good that it's like, hey man, a guy who is well-read and intellectual like yourself is like, dude, I'm seeing the progress. And if you see the progress, it's a reminder of, like, all right, man, like, I'm on the right path. So I think I just want to clarify, that's what I like. Of course, if I become, well off as a result, great. But I'm confident enough in the American system that if I work hard enough, I'll always have the ability to, if nothing else, work for someone and make a decent amount of money.
Totally. First, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put, like, values in your, like, speak to your values. That's not my place. But I totally get, like, the process. The process is huge. But what do you think drives you so hard then? Because I think that you work much harder than most people, myself included. I'm a very lazy person, but you work super hard. What do you think has driven you to do that? Because that's not, I think, a normal thing.
Well, I want to kind of, if I could, I would like to redefine the term hard work. Like, I think when people think of hard work, why it's so intimidating is, like, for me, if I think of hard work, like, I say, hey man, I'm going to go to the gym and work hard. The first image in my mind is like a bodybuilder maxing out on a bench press, right? Like, trying to lift 500 pounds. Like, I'm working so hard. I don't think you have to, quote unquote, work hard to be successful. You have to be consistent, though. You have to, like, for example, I mean, dude, in Beijing, I thought I was very consistent at every day after work. I would try to get on the computer for an hour or two and write The Long Road East, my next book. And, like, did I write 7 days a week? No. But often it was 4 or 5 days. And it's like, you start to add that up, even if you only work for an hour a day on your book, like, dude, at the end of the week, you did 5 hours. At the end of the month, you have 20 hours, like, I don't think you have to, quote unquote, work hard to accomplish your goals. It isn't to say, like, you shouldn't. I just think people kind of get intimidated by the term hard work, and they think I have to go max bench press and whatever I'm doing for the next 20 years. It's like, no, you just have to consistently do it. I mean, a great example is, I obviously love Spanish, right? It's something I'm passionate about.
Mhm.
Well, even after we left Bogota, dude, like I'm still on Duolingo for 15 minutes in the morning when I wake up. A lot of people, they get on their phone and they look at Facebook and they're like, all right, 20 minutes later, I'm time to go take my shower. Like for me, I'm on Duolingo just trying to learn 3 new words before I go to work, or I still do an hour lesson with a native Spanish speaker once a week. Like that's not working hard in my opinion. That's something I enjoy, but it's just the consistency. So I apologize for going on a tangent. That's my opinion on like hard work, but
well then you're unique. We don't have to call it hard work, but like there is something unique about you that has given you this ability. And I guess what do you think about that?
I mean, dude, maybe I'm lucky. Maybe my brain is just wired to want to do something special.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, man, like my parents, right? Like I come from a middle-class family, love my mom and dad. In my opinion, they gave me every opportunity in the world.
Mm-hmm.
What a waste it would be on my part if I didn't grind to be the most successful version of myself that I possibly could,
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that if I just worked my job, came home, watched the latest series on Netflix, that my parents wouldn't love me. No, they would love me no matter what happened. But to me, like, I think it's that, like, I don't know how it was for you, but my dad, when I was playing sports growing up, he was always super hard on me. Like it wasn't like, hey man, you have to be LeBron James in everything you do, but it was like, you have to conduct yourself with a purpose. Like you have to work hard. You have to do what you can. And like, obviously I hated it as a kid. I'm like, why is my dad yelling at me? Like, God, no one else's dad yells at them this much.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still thankful today though, that he's like, that in many ways, I thought he was an asshole. Today, I'm like, no, I appreciate that. Like whenever I get yelled at work, for example, I'm just like, all right, whatever. Like I'm so used to people being critical that it's like, dude, I think that's part of being a man. You have to deal with people talking shit to you every day. Like my first book, whatever you think about it, some people wrote nasty reviews on it. Some people liked it, but like I have the temperament to kind of absorb that because I'm just used to things being a little difficult or not getting my way. You had talked about this. Like, I think a lot of people in our society today, they're looking at things they want the path of least resistance. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's also nothing wrong with hard work. There's nothing wrong with struggling a little bit and not being good enough, right? Like we see these in beauty standards, right? Is we'll sit back and we'll say, you should love me no matter what I look like. To me, like, I don't think that's true. Like, I don't think I have to view the opposite sex as in all the same objective lens. Like there's women I find attractive. There's women I don't, right? There's body types I like. There's body types I don't. To say, well, you should love me no matter what I look like. That's a farce in my opinion. Like, I don't know, man. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Jeez.
No, not necessarily like beauty standards per se, but just anything that I had said recently. What do you think about that?
I was just thinking, like, if you're going to get me going on our society and what I think of it, it's going to be a long, dark road. I think it's interesting when you talk about your dad and how he yelled at you and how you said, but I'm glad he did. And that's totally how I feel about how my parents were, because my mom she was tough as nails. And I was like, I hate you. And she's like, when you're older, you're going to be so happy that I was this way. And I was like, there's no way. And now I'm 28 and I'm like, I wish she was harder. And I love that she was hard on me. So I totally felt that. But yes, going to the objective beauty standards, no, it's completely ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Like right now, I'm not in great shape relative to what I've been. And I feel insecure about that fact and I don't like it. But that's good, right? It's not just good, it's a shame, right? What it is that it's true. If I don't look as good, people are not going to find me as attractive. And it's just good to face that reality, not because I'm trying to be mean to myself or other people are mean to me for finding me less attractive. It's just there are some things about life that are out of your control. And one of them is that beauty is, in a sense, objective. It is to a certain degree objective, and you can't control that. So I guess for society, it's like our society now can't accept that there are objective standards. I think because nobody wants to be a loser to a certain extent. And I think, I mean, we can go down a deep rabbit hole, but it does come down to like a lot of people in our society are losers. And that's not their fault. It's the society's fault, I think. But this is a defense, is I'm going to redefine beauty so that I couldn't be a loser, right? There is no beauty. There's just subjectivity, and it's you being mean. But I guess, I mean, this is a can of worms, but at the root, I think it's just very pathological, the way that we look at beauty.
In what sense?
That we've destroyed any sense of values, like someone being better or worse, because that's false. If you told someone, like a child, right? Let's say you had a 5-year-old child and you said, you know, you can be like, take care of your body, or you can become obese and self-mutilate, right? Or like, but like that's extreme. That is very extreme. But it's like, are we going to say beauty is just subjective and that's not, there's no difference? Or like telling a child to be obese and that it's okay? No, I'd say that that's child abuse. You're essentially indoctrinating a child into believing something that is in their worst interest. It's like telling them to accept candy from strangers and to go into vans without windows. That's wrong. And people are doing that all the time. And it's just sad because what people believe dictates how they live their lives. And we are teaching people and making people believe things that make them live worse lives, and then be lashing out in frustration because they don't know how to fix their lives. And it's because they've been lied to all the time and they don't even know where to go. And it's just a really sad situation.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I don't really know when it started, you know, and I don't know if it's just I don't really know where the root of, like, again, I've never personally, what's wrong with criticism, right? Like, what's wrong with like telling, and it doesn't give you license to be mean to them.
Mm-mm.
But when is the truth not benefited someone, right? You know, like that old cliche of, I don't even know the cliche, but when people will say, you know, tell the truth, no matter how painful it hurts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. In my life, like, that's worked, you know, and I don't mean to represent that as, you know, you should always tell the truth and never lie. I'm not saying that. Like, there are obviously crazy circumstances that would warrant lying. But in general, right? Like, Casey, if you were just like I respect you, right? Because you said, yeah, man, you know, I'm not really working out the way I want to. I don't look the way I want to. Like, okay, like, I can get down with that. Like, you're not sitting here victimizing yourself. You're saying, yeah, like, it's my fault. It's my responsibility. I can respect the humility. But I know people who, you know, dude, they're, let's say, out of shape, or they're not on the right path in life, and it's not their fault, even though it quite clearly is their fault. Mm-hmm. Like, why am in a way then I'm the bad guy if I point that out, right? But then the problem is so I don't point it out, that person continues to go down a bad path. No one really wins, right? I feel repressed emotionally. That person is continuing to spiral, and it's all because, well, we have to cater to their emotions. We don't want to hurt their feelings. Makes me very upset, because I've always grown when someone like yourself, like any of the people I look up to in life, they give me the unfiltered truth that I don't want, and I always get better as a result. But yet our society, we don't want to do that anymore. I don't get it. It's perplexing, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because lies are they go down a lot easier than the truth. And if I was like getting into civilization, I think because America is so wealthy and successful, it was okay to lie because the consequences of lies weren't going to fall on us for a long time, right? Like, if lies cost, like, let's say a lie costs $1, if you've got $1 million, you can lie for a long time before you're going to have to pay up, right? Or feel the burn. And that's where I think we are, is we were so successful that we could lie and become worse and worse because of that. But as far as the more personal stuff, I agree with you 100%. Like, I want to be able to tell people the truth. And I think that it's right to tell people the truth, even if everyone else says it's wrong, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I'll lie if Nazis are banging on my door and asking me if I'm hiding Jews, then I'll say, no, I'm not, right? I'll lie about that. But I will not, I think almost any other lie is it's just wrong. It is just wrong. And anybody who says otherwise is just, we can rationalize anything, right? So, no, I mean, I think the most courageous people alive right now are the people who stand up when everyone else is saying, you're wrong, you're hateful, you're this, you're that. And they say, no, I'm just going to tell the truth. That is an act of supreme courage today. Because we really do live in a world of lies right now.
Yeah, man. Literally. Yeah. I'll switch the tenor of the conversation a little lighter, right? So, and along this same vein, though. So I'm a guy who, dude, I'll swallow the pill, right? Like if I'm not doing things correctly in life, tell me, and I'll, dude, you might drive me to be very irritated or frustrated, but at least, all right, we're over. Now we can start to heal and move on. So I'm obviously a guy, you could probably tell I value vanity, right? In a woman, let's say. I value beauty, right? And dude, you're from LA, man. There's attractive women everywhere in LA, at least according to Instagram. Reality's probably a little different. Yeah. When I'm looking for an ideal mate, right? Someone who I could marry. Ideally, I want a woman who's like 10 out of 10, voluptuous, put together, unicorn status. She's got the personality. Mm-hmm. Here's something I heard, though, a few weeks ago. That's what I want, right? But do I deserve that? And the honest truth is, the more that this person discoursed on this subject, I was like, no, I don't. Because if that woman's a 10, right? She's got the whole package. She's everything. That's her currency, right? Why should she go for me? Dude, I'm a guy who, at best, is middle class. Mm-hmm. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment. I don't have the resources to, in many ways, justify being with a unicorn. Mm-hmm. So how do you feel about that? How do you feel about, is that too brutal? Is it am I in many ways unable to marry someone right now because I'm not where I want to be, even though this is what I desire, but I'm not a 10, right? Like maybe I'm a 6 or a 7, because I don't have those resources to provide for a woman who, with all due respect, she should go after someone with a lot of money because she deserves it, or she's earned it, or whatever, however you want to define it. What are some of your thoughts on that? Because I know you and I off air disagree on this a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think money is important to getting let's say, your unicorn. Mm-hmm. But honestly, I think it's sad that it's that important, that money would dictate that much. I think it should dictate little, in all honesty. And honestly, I think I've kind of found it, I've found a unicorn, and I think that you can find women who are very good women and beautiful, who have good values and like you, not just because you have money or success, but because you're kind, right? I think, and I'm almost laughing at myself because I see how the internet talks and how people are so cynical these days. They'll call me a simp or something like that. No, if you're kind, if you can, I love to cook and I cook for my girlfriend, and she loves that, right? You can laugh with each other. You guys can talk to each other. These things mean something, and I am not successful. I guarantee you, I'm not a successful person.
Not yet.
Not yet. But right now, I wouldn't date me. But there's so much more to it than that. And I think it's sad that we think money is so important. And I think it's sad that a lot of people, men and women, act like it's important because it's not. And if you marry someone because they have a lot of money or because they're just beautiful, you're not going to be as happy as if you married someone who's a little bit less wealthy or a little less beautiful, but very compatible with you and a person of character. So I have the cynicism too. You should make money. Don't get me wrong, but there's so much more than that.
Certainly. A little context, bro. I'm reading a book right now. It's called The Dark Side of Man. Mm-hmm. And, dude, it's a very scientific book, but it's got a little bit of narrative in it. And it's oh man, our DNA is 98% the same as gorillas. Mm-hmm. Our DNA is 97% the same as baboons. Well, it doesn't take a genius to know that baboons and gorillas act and behave like animals, right? And so sometimes people use that as justification. Well, it's in my DNA. Well, of course it's in your DNA. it doesn't mean you have to act like that, right? Like part of being a sentient being is you have the ability to think outside the box or to think past impulse and emotion.
Mhm.
But it's interesting because it like these zoologists or, I don't even anthropologists, they'll study like baboon tribes and things like that. And it's interesting because like you had talked earlier about, women, a lot of like the top 20% of men will be involved with 80% of the women. Well, it's the same thing in like with baboons and gorillas, right? Like typically the females will flock towards the strongest gorilla or the gorilla with the most resources, right? So what we see play out in society is just a natural result of who we are, right? Like, I don't think that we can fault, like when you talk about, oh yeah, man, like you don't have to be the wealthiest guy in the world to get, attractive, awesome unicorns, with great personalities. I agree, but the data would suggest otherwise, right? Like there's a reason why the guy that just walked past your window, he's not married, man, and he's not going to the bar tonight and like coming home lucky. It's because he doesn't have any resources. He doesn't have anything that we can offer. So, while I don't think people should necessarily have the same perspective of me, which is like, hey, man, like you got to be somebody. You also can't take the route of, well, I should just have a quality mate that I want because I exist. It's like, well, sure, but the world doesn't necessarily work like that, and we have a lot of evidence to suggest that it doesn't work like that. So I'm a bit confounded personally because I agree with you, but I don't think it plays out that way.
I guess like in my experience, it has played out this way. Because the women that I've been with have all been, I think, very good women. Yeah, like I really have little bad things to say about them. They're human, but no, I think they were good women. And they've never married me or been with me for my money. I can guarantee you that. But the whole, like, I want to go to the chimpanzee thing. Like we share 97% of our DNA.
Baboons.
Baboons, gorillas, chimps, all these things. Well, I mean, we share 50% of our DNA with like flatworms. So sharing a lot of DNA with something doesn't mean you're even remotely similar to them. Like that's just a sort of story that in our society we tell each other. Like, oh, you got 98% chimp DNA. Well, I'm not like flinging my shit at other things. I don't like, we're different. And I don't, when I look at like the ideal way humans should live, I don't look at chimp societies. I imagine in my mind, like, sorry to get philosophically to the left again. You have to imagine in your mind the ideal world, and we start walking towards it, right? We're not trying to look back at chimps and walk back to, or gorillas and walk back to one man sleeping with 20 gorilla women. Which, I mean, if you want to do that, I don't care. Well, I do care. It's no skin off my back. But what's the guy's name? Dan Bilzerian, who's got like that yacht with like, he has like new 10 out of 10 women on his yacht all day. Like that kind of thing, we shouldn't celebrate that. We shouldn't say that's good. We should say that is a human being who is acting like an animal. That is someone who is acting lower than what it is to be a human being. Because to be a human being, and the thing that makes us so special is that we don't look at other humans as objects. Like a woman's not just like someone to show off or have sex with. It's someone you can look at as a subject, right? That's love. When you see someone as the identity they are and not as the superficial image, right, that they are. So I think like that's what we should do as a society is we should look at people like Dan Bilzerian or a rich guy who has a beautiful wife that doesn't love him and say, you are acting like an animal. Like I look down on you because you do not know what it is to be human, and you do not know that it is better to have that sort of subjective connection. You're so caught up in being like possessing things and not sharing yourself with someone else.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, any woman who I've ever dated, it's the same thing. She's not with me for my money. Maybe, and this is potentially a character flaw of mine, but I don't think she's with me to not make money. And what I mean by that is like, yeah, like, dude, she likes what I'm all about. Maybe she finds me attractive. Well, hopefully finds me attractive. Mm-hmm. And we have good times. But it's a bit of that starving artist narrative, right? Where it's like you invest in the starving artist, not because you expect him, like you like his personality, but you also think the starving artist will eventually become a wealthy artist or a success. So like there's always that reality. And again, I'm probably too jaded, like probably used Tinder too much in my life, whatever. But I'm a little cynical about motivations. I'd like to think I understand them, but perhaps I overanalyze them and miss the point entirely, because you're right, man. Quality of life. Like, for example, in Colombia, we went down there. I know personally, I had probably $2,500 in my account, right? Mm-hmm. We had a blast, did a lot of cool things, saw a lot of unique places. How else could that have experience really benefited by having money? Like, let's say instead of 2,500, I had $100,000. Well, we probably would have stayed in a nicer place, maybe ate at some nicer restaurants, but that's about it. Like not much would have really changed, because you and I are still hanging out. Like, I can't buy you, Casey. Like, you're my friend. You're like, I get the utmost joy from like commiserating with you and collaborating with you. I can't necessarily buy that. Where, yeah, like Danny B, dude, he can go stay on a yacht off the coast of Colombia, and I'm in an Airbnb with Senora Consuelo. But at the end of the day, like, dude, it's all about who you surround yourself with. The money, it's more of a security measure than it is actually providing you happiness. So I do agree with you in that respect.
Totally. Well, I think, like you said, like there was nothing that could have made my time in with you better, because that whole like my shtick about love, it operates the same thing with like a good friend, right? Like I care about you because I know you on a deeper level, and I've experienced so many things with you, right? So I don't just think of you as like my boy who's tall and like maybe looks good and can get like women to come near me. It's like, oh no, he's a person who I care about deeply, right? That's what's important. And I think you're right that like women aren't just going to like take you if you're homeless. But I think that we overestimate how much money is important. And also that you in life, you get what you look for, like you get what you seek. And if you think people are out for money and you like are always concerned with that, I think that you'll find someone who's more out for money. And if you kind of think I want to get to know someone on a deeper level, then you will find people who do that. And you'll very quickly realize when people are not doing that, when they are shallow, and then you can cast them aside.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to kind of try to wind this down in a good way. 18% battery left on my Mac being the sole reason. Where are you kind of at in life now, Casey? Like, if I want to, like for context, you were the main editor of my book, the next one, The Long Road East, and you did a fantastic job. You really brought that thing to life. You gave it a lot of perspective that it was lacking. What, if someone wants to work with you as an editor, let's say they want you to edit their book, what's a good way that they could get in touch with you?
Well, first I want to say that was very kind of you to say. And the material, I mean, I'm an editor, so I'm just working with what you give me. And there was enough, like a lot in there to make it into something that I think is now a great product. But you said to contact me for editing?
Yeah, I mean, dude, I think you should work with other people. Like, and I know that you constantly are looking for people to help edit their books or their works. But what's a good way that someone could get in touch with you? Like LinkedIn, Instagram?
Yeah, you can look at me on LinkedIn under Casey Nordbak, and also on Instagram. And I also got a website, unpaidphilosophy.com, unpaved philosophy.com. And just send me a message and you can contact me through there.
Absolutely. Dude, this has been fun. And yeah, dude, appreciate the privilege to speak with you, Casey. This has been awesome.
The privilege was all mine.
All right, sweet, Casey. Have a good rest of your Saturday.
Same, man. Bye.
Peace.